Almost there.
One is already.
There we go. Okay, so I hope everyone had a beautiful Chag, and it's nice to regroup with you. Let me make sure that we're recording. Yeah, we are. Okay, and back to here. Share my screen. And here we go. Okay, so like I said, sorry about that, folks. Sorry about that. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If I could ask everyone to please mute yourself, so that way we don't get any ambient noise. Thank you. And I'm going to try and boost the internet connection so that we don't run into that problem. Sure. There we go. Okay. So it's time to say Baruch Nafshi, to thank Hashem for the tremendous gift. And why does this pertain to the Kuzari? It pertains to the Kuzari because up until now, what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was talking about was how patently self-evident it is that the universe must have a creator. And he points to the fact that when you look at creation, you are awestruck. You are struck by the wondrousness of creation. And only a person who is completely oblivious to his environments could possibly have such callousness to not be able to find God within creation. And this is why some of our great Musar leaders, Musar teachers throughout the centuries have extolled the virtue, and not just our Musar teachers, but also, our great philosophers, like Maimonides as well, have told us that it's important to lift our heads up and to see the world around us. It's not sufficient to remain in the Beit Midrash and to just learn the texts. Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam, there's no question about that. But when it comes to appreciating the Niflaot HaBorei, the wonders of the Creator, really the most effective way to do that is to be able to look out at the world and to be able to see nature, to be able to observe the way that God has created a magnificent masterpiece. So that's what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said he's going to be doing over the next few pages. It's about the next 8-9 pages of the Kuzari he devotes to an analysis of Baruch Nafshi. We're going to try to run through it a little bit more quickly than normal, but let's just try and at least appreciate where he's coming from. We're on page 506. The rabbi says that the Borchi Nafshi prayer, which is Psalm 104, and remember, I pointed out that our custom is to say it every Rosh Chodesh. I know that there are people who say Borchi Nafshi when they need a special refuah, they need a special Yeshua. I know that people who are coping with infertility challenges, there's a custom to say, or people who are coping with shidduch challenges, there's a custom to say Borchi Nafshi for 40 days straight. Has anyone ever heard of that minhag? And Nishmas Kol Chai, some people do Borchi Nafshi. It's interesting because Nishmas is not a biblical text, it's a rabbinic text. Okay.
Good question.
You might have to say it for the rest of your life. Okay. Right. So the rabbi said it corresponds to the order of creation. This Borchi Nafshi song. It begins with, he wraps the world with light. And I have the text in front of you. Borchi Nafshi et Hashem. My soul will give blessing to God. So we talked about that the last time we met a couple of weeks ago, that David wants to point out, Borchi Nafshi, this is not just a superficial praising of God. One should not think that just because I am admiring the physical trappings of this creation, that I'm doing something that is not spiritual. David wants to emphasize that this is a spiritual exercise as well. Hashem Elokai gadalta ma'od, God, you have done something really great. Hod v'hadar lavashta, that through your creation, you have adorned yourself with glory and majesty. Ote or kasalma, you have wrapped light like a garment. So Ote or kasalma is the initial stage of creation. Okay, we're getting multiple ringtones. If we could just ask everyone, just put your phone on either vibrate or mute. We appreciate it very much. Ota or kasalma, God wraps light like a garment, which means that the translation over here says wrapped in a robe of light, that God is wrapped in a robe of light. But the way that Rebbe Yehuda Halevi learns it, that he wraps the world with light like a garment. That when Hashem first created the world, he said Yehi Or, and therefore the world was, or the universe was wrapped in light. Now, light could also refer to energy, and this could refer to the creation. Some people suggest that when God said, "Let there be light," even though the sun is only created later on the fourth day of creation. What is that original light? Our sages say that it's a spiritual light, but you could also understand it to be that's the background of energy that exists throughout the universe. That's the light, because light is energy, right? So he wraps the entire universe with light. Noteh shamayim kayiri'ah, that God spreads out the heavens like a tent cloth, or like a canvas, that everything stretches out. We've learned before when we talked about the book of creation that our rabbis identify one of the names of Hashem as creator as Shaddai. And the reason why he's named that name, Shaddai, is that Hu she'amar le'olamo dai. It's because he is the creator who said to his world, die. What does die mean? Enough, must speak. What does that mean? God said die to his world. It means that when God first created the world, it continued expanding and expanding and expanding until Hashem said, stop. Now, that is a very profound statement. let's understand it at least from the perspective of our Mikubalim, our Kabbalists, who say that because this is something that emanates from Hashem, it must be as resemblant as possible to God, one would think. And therefore, since God stretches to infinity, his universe, we would think, stretches to infinity. What God does is that he says, die. He creates a reduction of himself and of the universe so that there is only a finiteness to the universe. But this idea of noteh shamayim kayiri'ah is descriptive of this spreading out of physical space until Hashem says, die. Hahu she'amar la'olamo die. Anything that is physical is bounded, is finite by its very nature. And then he continues. So, which is an allusion to God's statement, let there be light. He hangs the heavens like a curtain, is an allusion to Yehi Rakia, let there be a firmament. He makes a roof of water for his attic. That's the next pasuk, pasuk Gimel, Hamekare v'mayim aliotav, that God makes a roof for the water that is in the attic. Hasam avim richuvo, he places clouds as his chariot. Hamehalech al kanfei ruach, he moves on the wings of the wind. Now, all of this is very strange language. But so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says that Hamekarev Hamayim Aliotav, he makes a roof of water for his attic, refers to the upper waters, because what the Torah describes in creation is that God said on the second day of creation, Yehi Rakia b'toch Yehi Rakia b'toch Hamayim, v'hi mavdil bein Mayim lamoyim. That Yehirakia Bashamayim, excuse me. It says, let there be a firmament in the sky, and may it be a divider between upper water and lower water. Vayavdel bein hamayim asher me'al rakia uvein hamayim asher mitachat lo rakia vayichein. That God said, let this be a divider between the upper water and the lower water. Now, what does upper water and lower water mean? This is a mystery, right? I remember listening to a presentation from Rav Simcha Wasserman of blessed memory, the son of Rebbe Chanan Wasserman. He spent a lot of time in LA. So when I was growing up, I had this zechus of hearing from him multiple times. And one of the things that he used to enjoy giving over is that when we look at Rashi and we find cryptic statements made by Rashi, we don't always understand why Rashi says the things he does, because Rashi's commentary is also very cryptic here. And he used to say that Rashi is like taking a vitamin. Sometimes you may not even understand the nutritional value of the vitamin, but it's good for you. So even when we don't understand, we should imbibe it nonetheless. Learn Chumash with Rashi, even when we don't understand. So that's a beautiful idea. But it's important for us as we get older and as we mature to try and understand as much of it as we possibly can. In past years, I've quoted the Abarbanel, who tries to help us understand better what the upper water and the lower water is. Some of the commentaries say that the upper water is the clouds and the lower water is the oceans, right? Which is certainly a rationalistic explanation, but it doesn't really explain so much about the rakia that is being expressed. The Abarbanel says that the word mayim, bless you, the word mayim in the first chapter of Bereshit, in the first chapter of the Torah, does not really refer to water. There is water that exists in our terrestrial realm, but that's only one form of mayim. Mayim is anything that is fluid and has no shape and is amorphous. That's the main characteristic of mayim. And what the Torah is trying to communicate is that God made a big separation on the second day of creation between the heavenly realm and the terrestrial realm. And in both realms, there was mayim. It was amorphous. It was like tohu vavohu. And it was in the process of formation. That's what the word mayim represents. And it's very apropos as we talk about Parshat Noach. Why did God bring a flood? The flood, because God could have brought destruction in any way. He could have caused a conflagration, a huge fire with fire and brimstone, the way he destroyed the people of Sodom. God could have destroyed the world that way. He could have sent a huge meteor. He could have caused an ice age. But why did God destroy the world with a flood? Because water represents something that lacks structure, shape, and organization. And that's what Hashem was trying to communicate in this message of the flood to mankind. You have caused a complete breakdown of any kind of societal structure and order and protocol, and courtesy and everything, and any kind of social structure. Every social structure has completely broken down. And that's represented by the torrents of water that just completely wipe everything out. If you're not able to organize yourselves properly, Hashem will send a flood to show what complete entropy and chaos looks like. So that's what the word Maya means. And so essentially, God dividing between the upper water and the lower water is Hashem dividing between the heavenly realm and the spirit and the physical realm, which is something that is not necessarily to be celebrated, because once you have that solid separation between the two realms, it becomes more difficult for those who are within this terrestrial realm to find Hashem. And so when our sages say that it doesn't say ki tov, it doesn't say behold that it was good on the second day of creation, they say because God continued his creation of separation on the third day. But on the deeper level, there's also another important reason why it doesn't say Vayar Elokim ki tov, that God saw that it was good on the second day, because it wasn't good from man's perspective for there to be a separation between the upper waters and the lower waters. This is really just a metaphor for the separation between heaven and earth. And just as creation continued to coalesce and to be organized from amorphous water-like structures to more concretized earthy structures, so too the heavens continued to be concretized more with the creation of angels and demons and Gan Eden and Gehenna. All of this, the structuring of the heavenly realm continued throughout the 6 days of creation. So that's the idea of God creating a firmament. It then discusses what happens in the air in regard to clouds, wind, fire, lightning, and thunder, and how all these operate under God's direction. As it says, for with them he judges nations, meaning that one of the things that we marvel at is that God utilizes the elements of the sky, that God, Hasam Avim Richuvo, God makes the clouds his chariot. Even today, in the 21st century, we have no way of even predicting the weather, let alone controlling the weather. And that's one of the reasons why we marvel when we look up at the sky, because it's just so huge and it's so unharnessable from a human perspective. We still can't understand how Hashem utilizes the clouds and the weather to be able to bring to the world what he feels mankind needs. Hamehalech al kanfei ruach, that God travels on the corners of the wind, that Hashem uses the wind. Okay, osem al achav ruchot, misharetav eish lohet, that this is also part of it. He makes the winds his messengers, fiery flames his servants. God sends forth a whole bunch of different meteorological conditions, whether it's rain or fire or other natural disasters, in order to judge nations. The psalmist poetically describes all of these by saying, he places the clouds as his chariot and leads them on wings of wind. He makes the winds his messengers. In other words, God sends the clouds to wherever he wishes, to do whatever he wishes. All this involves the firmament discussed in the biblical account of creation. So we'll hold it here for today in the Kuzari, and we will continue. We'll take it step by step. Before we go into Parshas Noach, just to let you know that I will be out of town next Tuesday, so we'll resume 2 weeks from today. I'm traveling to Poland the second time to lead a group to be able to remind ourselves what happened 80 years ago and to put it in perspective of what's going on today. Okay. So let's go to Parshat Noach at this point. Let's go. Okay. The title of our Dvar Torah for today is Parshas Noach, Noah the Drunkard, Nihilism or Hope. And I wanted to share with you just a few quotes about both nihilism and hope in the face of despair and destruction. Okay, so the first thing that it's important to know is a pasuk from the end of this last Shabbos' parsha, Parshat Bereshit. Noach is named Noach. Why? Vayikra et shemo Noach lemor. That his father, or Hashem, it's not really clear who is the caller of Noach's name. He called his name Noach, saying, in other words, because the word Noach means Ze yenachamenu mima'asenu umeitzavon yadenu. This little child, is going to comfort us from all of our actions and from the sadness of our handiwork. Min ha'adama, from the earth, asher erara Hashem, from the earth that God has cursed. In other words, there is some kind of portent that Noach is going to be providing us with some kind of alleviation of pain and suffering that comes from the ground. Now, what does this mean? What does this all mean? That Noach is going to provide us with alleviation and comfort from the curse that comes from the ground. Now, if we look at Rashi, Rashi says, Ze yenachamenu, this one will comfort us. Yaniach mimenu et itzavon yadein. Rashi says, Yenachamenu doesn't mean he will comfort us by making us feel better, but rather it means, because like when you go to a Shiva house, you're a menachem, right? You're menachem avel. Now, what does that mean? You don't remove the pain. You can't take away the loss. The person is still dead, even though you go to comfort the mourner, but rather you emotionally soothe the person who's experiencing pain. So it helps, but it doesn't take away the loss, okay? It's important to know that that's what nechama means. But Rashi says, Noach's name was not Menachem. Why wasn't his name Menachem? Because he wasn't just a comforter, but he was a fixer. Is that he actually made things better when there was a deficiency. He took away that deficiency and augmented it. So, ad shelo ba Noach, lo haya lahem klei macharesha, v'hu hechin lahem. Before Noach, people didn't have plowing tools. And Noach was a technologist. He helped to bring tools that could make life easier for a farmer. V'haita haaretz motzi'a kotzim v'dardarim kishezorim chitim mikilalato shel Adam Harishon. Furthermore, before Noach came along, the earth used to produce an excessive amount of thorns and thistles and weeds, so making it very hard to plant wheat and to harvest anything substantive. But uviyamei Noach nacha. And in Noach's lifetime, that sort of was alleviated to some degree. Not that the earth stopped producing thorns, but in some way, Noach was able, for whatever reason, in Noach's time, that stopped. One way of understanding it is that through plowing tools, you're able to uproot the thorns and the thistles, and that makes for better fields, okay? V'zehu yenachamenu yaniach mimenu. So the word yenachamenu doesn't mean to comfort, but it's yaniach mimenu, not yenachamenu, but it's really two words contracted into one. Yanach mimenu. He will make life easier for us. He will remove the source of discomfort and hardship. But he says, V'im lo tifarshehu kach. He says, because if you don't explain it that way, his name should have been Menachem. Right? So that's what brings Rashi to the point of saying Noach was a fixer, that he was able to come up with the proper technology that farmers needed to make life a little bit easier. Okay? And then the final pasuk is V'Noach matzachen be'inei Hashem. Final pasuk of last week's parsha is Noach finds favor in the eyes of God. It could be that he found favor in the eyes of God in contrast to the rest of mankind, which was extremely corrupt. But part of the reason why Noach may have found favor in the eyes of God is because God saw that Noach was one of the only people in the world that really cared about making the human condition a little bit better. Because he was this technologist, he was this great inventor. So it shows that Elon Musk can also be that person to find favor in the eyes of God. I'm not commenting on his personal life, his moral values, what he does in behind closed doors. That's not what I'm commenting on. But any human being who brings new technology to make life easier to live is going to find favor, at least according to this reading, is going to find favor in the eyes of Hashem, independent of his personal behavior, right? Now, let's fast forward the story. The flood is over. Noach and his family come off the ark. Vayochel Noach ish ha'adama vayita karen. Noach is Vayochel. Now, Vayochel means to start. It can mean other things as well. Sometimes the word Vayichal, for example, means to supplicate. But so the word Vayachel can be translated in many different ways, as we'll see in just a moment. But Noach is described here as the Ish HaAdama, the man of the soil. Is that a positive thing to be called an Ish HaAdama, or is it a negative thing to be called an Ish HaAdama? Right, so just suspend your judgment. Vayita Karim, and he plants a vineyard. And of course, what is the aftermath of that? He harvests grapes. Vayesht min hayayin vayishkar. He drinks from the wine and he becomes drunk. Vayitgal b'toch ahalo. And I think you could say that he wallowed. That could be the right word in English, I'm not sure, in his tent. But he's behaving like a drunkard in his tent. He's completely undressed and he doesn't know what he's up doing. He's just basically wallowing in his tent. So Rashi, in trying to explain what the word Vayochel means, Rashi has a unique interpretation based on the Midrash that the word Vayochel comes from the word chulin. Does anyone know what the word chulin means? Something having to do with mundaneness. Asa atzmo chulin. So Vayachel means like hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Chol is the opposite of holy. There's a whole tractate in the Talmud called Masechet Chulin, because it's in contrast to Masechet Zivachim, which deals with sacrificial animals. Chulin deals with non-sacrificial animals that are non-holy, non-sanctified. So when it says that Noach made himself mundane, it also means he made himself profane, in that he did something that was no longer within the realm of holiness, but he did something that was um, a demotion from what he had done previously. He degraded himself in some way. Shahayalo la'asok techila b'netiya acheret. Because Noach should have engaged, if this is the first thing as a farmer that he's going to engage in, like if you're building the new world, okay, and you could plant anything, and you're a technologist like Noach, like we learned from the last Parsha, what would be the first thing that you would plant? Okay, there's a lot of controversy today whether it's better to be a hunter-gatherer or whether it's better to be, like the people who look back at world history and they say maybe we would have been better being hunter-gatherers and being carnivores instead of focusing on farming and agriculture and being and focusing on planting grain. But certainly you would not have planted grapeseed. What would you have planted first? Wheat. Maybe if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you plant corn, right? But you'd plant something, or potatoes if you're in Ireland, right? But you'd plant things that have far greater utility for the bare necessities of human survival, correct? Like you almost have to ask yourself the question, what did in the early period, while planting is going on, what did Noach and his family eat? So the answer is, in all likelihood, they probably ate wild growing herbs, and probably they ate birds because there may have been birds and probably a lot of fish also, depending upon the different interpretation that you subscribe to, whether the fish survived the mobble or not, right? So, but they were probably eating a lot of protein. And so he plants for the first time, doesn't plant wheat, plants grapes. And that is according to Rashi, the reason that led him to become drunk. Now, you can certainly understand Noach becoming drunk because he sees the world around him and he is wallowing in his own nihilism. He sees the world as all destroyed. Yes, it's true. God wanted me to build an ark and spend a year on it with the animals who didn't give me a moment's rest. And now and God now expects me to rebuild the world. But really, after all of this devastation, after this absolute, complete and total holocaust of all humanity, is it really worth it? Is there any purpose left in life if there's absolutely nothing out there? So he says, the problem is not suffering itself or oblivion itself. I'm just quoting from this quote I found, but the depraved meaninglessness of these things, the absolutely inhuman nihilism of suffering. What's the point, is what Noach is trying to say. And why is the natural resort to drink wine? So I found this interesting snippet from a book called From an Occult Diary, where this was an author at the turn of the 20th century, August Strindberg, who writes about his wife's death and just can't recover from that tragedy, his life. He says, the only thing that gave me an illusion of happiness was wine. This is why I drank. It also mitigated the torment of being alive. It made my sluggish mind alert and intelligent. At times in my youth, it stilled my hunger. So this is what someone who is suffering terribly and doesn't see a way out of the suffering, doesn't see a way to move beyond what seems to be meaninglessness and just devastation without a future. That's what someone does. So there is a depiction in the eyes of Chazal that Noach was a nihilist, and not that, and again, yes, he's condemned for it, but he's not condemned harshly in the Torah. Nowhere does the Torah say that God cursed Noach for behaving in this way. Canaan, his grandson, is cursed. Ham is cursed. Noach is not taken to task because, after all, look what he's been through over a year of seeing his entire society completely destroyed. It's like, you're the only person in your entire country who was able to survive a nuclear holocaust, and you come up after a year of hiding and living off rations, and then you come out and you see this dystopian reality in front of you, and like, yeah, I've seen enough science fiction to know what this is all about, right? And you see, and you like, what's the point? Is it even worth rebuilding? That's the way that our sages are portraying Noach in this version of the story. Go ahead, Rachel.
I'm finding this very emotional because I'm thinking about survivors from Nova and what people are going through in Israel and the suicide rate and the
we cannot
addiction rate.
And so therefore we understand. It's a very good point. We understand why this young man just last week committed suicide, that he survived Nova. His girlfriend was murdered, and he just couldn't find the will to continue living. It was too painful for him, right? You understand?
And that's why people should have meaning and purpose. And
absolutely.
And
that's what we're now going to do. We're going to create a contrast to find the commentaries who say that there are two types of survivors, and you saw this after the Shoah as well. There were those survivors who fell into deep depression. I remember the story. You remember the story of Primo Levi, who was a survivor, who ended up committing, it seems to be that he committed suicide. Later in life, he just couldn't go beyond the pain of those memories, okay? And yet, there were other kinds of survivors, and we're seeing this in our lifetime as well, who find purpose, who have this tremendous drive to continue living, to be reunited with their loved ones, and to give their lives renewed purpose because of what they've been through. Let's take a look at the other depiction of Noach from the Radak, okay? Let's take a look at what the Radak says. Vayachel Noach isha adama. So he says, why is he called, the Radak points out that Noach is here called the Isha Adama. Now I ask you the question, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? For Rashi, Isha Adama means that he's earthy. He's just focused on just the physical, just the immediacy of just the moment of now, and he descends into depression and nihilism, okay? But look at what the Radak says. Ki Noach hitasek ba'avodat ha'adama v'hitchakem ba. Noach, from the time that he was born, people knew that he was going to be the technologist who was going to improve humanity through being able to harness the difficulties of the soil. Okay, va'ata achar hamabul hitchakem od. So earlier in life, before the flood, he had figured out how to till the soil, remove the thorns and thistles, and cultivate farmland. Here he came up with another patent, as we say in Yiddish and in Hebrew. What is a patent? Like a patent. He was able to come up with this innovative idea of, I have a new innovation in agriculture. Lintoa hagifanim rabim yachad v'la'asot min ha'anavim yayin. He says, I'm going to create vineyards, and vineyards produce wine. Ki ad hena lo hayu shotim yayin. Up until this episode, people didn't drink wine. Ela ochlim ha'anavim kisha'ar ha'perot. People would eat grapes. But to eat grapes, you don't need a vineyard. A vineyard is a huge amount of grapes because you need a huge amount of grapes to manufacture wine. But if you're just growing grapes for fruit, for table grapes, like I learned this many years ago, that there's two different kinds of grape growers. There's the table grape growers, who are mostly in Chile, and then there are the wine grape growers, who are all around the world in different places, in California, even in Ontario, Niagara region, right, et cetera, et cetera. So before Noach came along and realized that you could turn grapes into juice that ferments and becomes wine, people were just growing grapes because they like table grapes. And you need only one vine for that. Noach's patent was to create vineyards with hundreds of vines, because that's what you need. The Noach hayat chila lenota e kerem. Noach was the first to create a vineyard, and that's a positive thing. And the Radak then proceeds to point out why this story is relevant. Why is this story relevant? So the first reason that he gives is to point out to us why one segment of humanity was cursed, to show, and then that's the whole story of Shem, Cham, and Yefet, how Shem and Yefet acted honorably, and how Cham and his son Canaan were behaved disgracefully. Va'od haya hasipur hazeh. But the second purpose of this story is lahazhir al mishteh hayayin v'shelo lishgot bo, is to warn man about the dangers of wine, and that a person should not be too engrossed in it. Kihu mafsid hadat, because drinking wine causes you to lose your faculties, dims your intellect. Ki im yishtehu chai v'yishtaker mimenu, because if you drink it in its undiluted state, meaning like in its full concentration, which is what Noach did, you're going to become shikker, and yiganev hamoach mi bilbul hamachshava v'yavo lidei shigaon. Then you're going to lose your mind. You're going to become very disoriented, and and many errors will emanate from you as a result. The Kama Hiflik Shlomo Bignuto, and that's why King Solomon was so disparaging of drinking wine. The Chen Hanavim, and the prophets as well. Lefichach ba sipur mimenu batara lesaper bignuto. And that's why the Torah relates the story of Noach becoming drunk to tell us how harmful drinking wine can be. Ki harishon sheshata mimenu nishtaker bo, the first person who drank wine. This is the first recorded story of someone getting drunk, drinking fermented fruit that has alcohol content. V'nishtabsha da'ato ad shenitkale ervato v'hu lo yada, to the point that he was so shikker that his nakedness was revealed, and he was completely oblivious to what was going on. So that's a cautionary tale to all future generations. Okay, yes.
No, it's true. Edition of Mishpacha, it was a long article, I don't know if anybody here read it, about how drinking is so prevalent in French society and how terrible it is, because men go to shul, they drink, they come home late, they just want to go to sleep, and they're in bad moods, and the kids see terrible examples.
Yeah.
The article made it sound like it was quite prevalent.
Yeah, perhaps even to epidemic proportions. I'm just grateful that I never developed a taste for alcohol. Like if someone has a yahrzeit and they're at a kiddush and they say, Rabbi, can I pour you a little drink? I'll say, okay, a couple of drops and l'chaim. I don't like it, doesn't do anything for me. And so thank God I'm very fortunate. I don't have the same nisayon that other people have. And by the way, it's not just men. I've seen women, not as many as the men, but I've seen shikker women in our shul over the years. And there are women who have drinking problems too. Yes, it's just important to be aware of it. Maybe it's because their wives drove them to it. I don't know, but yeah. I don't, because their husbands drove them drove them crazy.
Said, so happy that you don't have the eggs for her to drink. We only have grape juice in the house because my husband never drinks anything except like a cider. And
I have a very full liquor cabinet, but it's like it's just getting dusty.
So-
Yeah. Because I only take it out when someone, when I have guests who will appreciate it. I don't generally, there are times, I will confess, I have a small bottle in my office here that I touch maybe once every 6 months to a year. I can count probably on one hand the number of times I've needed to take a drink after a meeting in my office. In other words, sometimes I've gotten so riled up over a meeting that I said, I realize I'm upset. I say, I need something to calm me down, and I'll take a drink. But one drink, just to calm my nerves, and then that's it.
it's also part of the new emphasis on materialism in the film world.
Big issue, big problem. Yeah.
Expensive bottles of, I don't know what they are, whiskey or things
Yeah,
like that.
it's mostly Scotch. Yeah.
Like that, and
Yeah.
so it's not only the drinking, it's the materialism, and one feeds off the other, and you can have the most expensive bottle of something.
Yeah, and it's becoming such an issue that our young men are being groomed to go into industries where they can make as much money as possible. Listen, there are cycles that the Jewish nation goes through. When I was growing up, materialism wasn't as emphasized. And so young men, guys my age, the minority of us, of course, would go into Klei Kodesh, but even the ones who wanted to go and have a career became doctors, became lawyers, became accountants, became professionals, engineers. You still see a lot of that, but you're seeing a lot more of these young men who immediately want to start becoming big earners. So they'll go into financing and banking, or real estate, because they see these heavy hitters in the community, and they realize if I'm going to need to live that lifestyle of the $1,000 bottle of Scotch, that's not an exaggeration. I'm going to need to start earning serious coin, right?
It's a matter of debt. They have to earn in order to live, in order to have a home, a place to raise their children.
100%.
Yeah.
How does a young
So it's not necessarily to have that $1,000 bottle of Scotch there.
Okay, all right. I think it's a combination of multiple factors. Anyway, let us go on. We won't solve that problem today. It is a challenge, right? But let us go on. The Radak's portrayal of Noach's effort is not critical, except for the fact that he overdid it and he got drunk. But the act of planting a vineyard is not viewed critically, but rather this was his way of further advancing agricultural technology. And if anything, Noach is seeing a positive future of there'll be a time again when we can make simchas and we can drink wine and rejoice. Okay, he overdid it, right? But because he wanted to taste the first fruits of his efforts. But to have a vineyard is not something that is negative in the eyes of Radak. It's actually an innovation. And so there is the opportunity to emerge from disaster and destruction and devastation and say, we will dance again, which was the slogan of the survivors of the Nova Festival, right? And like J.K. Rowling said, rock bottom becomes the solid foundation on which I rebuilt my life. Or this other quote that I found by a woman named Christine Kane. Sometimes when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but you've actually been planted.
No, but I've been the lady who spoke with her son Benjamin.
Yes.
That was her quote.
That was her quote. She said, "We didn't bury our son, we planted him." Yes. Now, the fact that this therefore is viewed as a positive should give us pause to be. There is a tendency for people to look at that glass half empty, especially after coming out of a devastating experience like this. But, the Jewish people did not just survive the Holocaust. This was what Rebbetzin Jungreis used to say this, Esther Jungreis of blessed memory. She used to say, we didn't survive after the Holocaust. We thrived after the Holocaust. The amount of building that we were able to do after the Shoah is just remarkable. It's a sign that the Jewish people see always the glass half full. We know that we will many times take blows, but we have to continue moving forward, rebuilding, making things better than ever before. That's right. So the question is, why then did Noach, what was his objective in planting this vineyard? And where did he go wrong? Like, why did he become drunk? If this was, like the Radak says, a virtuous and positive movement forward. So here you have to really look at the Zohar, and I'm not sure if we're going to have time to look at it completely. But I just wanted to share with you this snippet from the Zohar. Noach was actually trying to do something extremely noble, because perhaps he saw that through the flood, there was an opportunity to rectify the original sin of Adam and Chava in the garden. Perhaps he saw, or at least one way of interpreting all of the devastation is, let's understand this devastation as an opportunity to restart without all of the perhaps mistakes and negative aspects of our past. And that one always has to look for opportunities. You know how a lot of people were saying that shortly before October 7th happened, there was so much acrimony and hatred within Israel over this Bagatz issue, over the Supreme Court issue, and people were taking to the streets and calling each other all manner of epithets, just hurling evil insults. And really, it was like brother against brother, family against family. It was horrible. And October 7th brought everyone together. And maybe what we can do is we can say, okay, move beyond the devastation and restart and put aside the negatives of the past. And one way of looking at this story of Noach replanting is that he saw there was an opportunity to make up for original sin in the garden. Now, what does this have to do with planting a vineyard? So if you may recall that there's a dispute in the Talmud as what the tree of knowledge of good and evil was. No one that I'm aware of says it was an apple tree. So all of those depictions of Adam and Eve eating an apple, right? What is one opinion in the Talmud? That it was grapes, and they were eating from a vine. That's what the Eitz Hada'at was. And if that's what the Eitz Hada'at was, the Zohar says that there's one opinion that Migan Eden eat tarchat unetzev lahacha. Where did Noach get the vine to plant? And the answer is he got it from the Garden of Eden, and he took it with him on the ark. And his intention all along was to replant the vine from the Garden of Eden, to replant the tree of knowledge. Which we have to understand why. So what was his objective? God told Adam and Chava, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. On the day that you eat from that tree, you will die. So what is Noach trying to do? He's trying to replicate the tree of knowledge and make the same mistake as Adam and Chava. So let's read a little bit further in the Zohar. Rabbi Shimon Amar, Raza de Chochmeta ihu hacha b'haikra. There is something very deep and very mysterious contained in this verse. Kad ba'a Noach lemivdak b'hahu chova devadak Adam harishon. Noach examined the original sin that Adam failed in. Lav li'it dabkabe ela leminda ula'atkana alma velo yachil. His intention was to repair the sin, the original sin, by saying to himself, I will replicate the act of eating from the tree of knowledge, but I will not make the same mistake as Adam. I will not detach myself from God in that process. Because one way of understanding what the original sin was, that through the eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, Noach, Adam and Chava had a more obscured view of Hashem by changing their intellects to the point where they could feel that sense of independent existence and not just being a product of Hashem and constantly in Hashem's presence. And Noach said, I will replicate that of eating from this tree, and I will allow my intellect to be somewhat dimmed, but I will not allow that to detach me from Hashem. Despite the obscurity that will be created through the eating of this these grapes, I will not make the same mistake as Adam and Chava, who realized that they were naked right after the sin, cover themselves up, try to hide from God. Noach says, I will not do that. I will not feel that I am separate from God in any way. Okay? But he was unable. He tried to rectify, but he too failed. And Sachat anavim lemivdak bahahu kerem. So what he did was he squeezed the grapes to try and test the vineyard, and kaven demata lahai vayishkar vayitgal. And unfortunately, instead of rectifying original sin, he failed in the very same way as Adam and Chava. He becomes drunk and wallows. He just simply lacked the strength to be able to withstand the intoxicating effects of eating from the tree of knowledge. This is a fascinating passage from Zohar. This is way out there, okay? But it's important. I think it's a very important interpretation. The Zohar continues by saying that, I'm just skipping a little bit because we're out of time, Igavna da b'nei Aharon de taninan shtuyeyayin havo. Nadav and Avihu made the same mistake as Noach, thinking that they could eat from the tree of knowledge in their time. And they drank wine, entered into the Holy of Holies, thinking that they could have this most intimate encounter with God, and they too fail. So according to the Zohar, Noach's failure was Adam and Chava's failure. Nadav and Avihu's failure was Adam and Chava's failure. And all of this is really man striving to have an even closer connection to God amidst obscurity. That was Noach's noble intention. But at the end of the day, there are so many lessons to take from this story. The first one is that when we emerge from devastation, we have to try and find the positive instead of the negative. Let's try and see the Radak over Rashi in the story of Noach, and that apply it to our own lives and gain inspiration from those who have been able to find inspiration from having been a hostage. And even when they've suffered ultimate losses. And then let's also realize that mankind is limited in his ability to repair and to attain ultimate closeness with Hashem. There are limits to the human condition. That's the lesson of the Zohar. Let's see quickly the comments. Let's see any sound. These young men resort to gambling too sadly for a win of quick money. Kiddush clubs. Just one question. How did Noach get past the fiery turning swords that were guarding the garden? Thought you might say that Adam and Chava took a vine with them and gave it to their offspring. Could be, Karen. I don't know. The Zohar does not elaborate on how Noach got the vine. It could be that maybe Adam and Chava took it out with them. They smuggled it out. Who knows? Who knows what happened? Okay. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you in 2 weeks from today, Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Take
Have a
care.
great trip.
Thank you.